I'm Mark Gagan and you're listening to the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Advantage Go. Pick and choose your own best-of-breed insurtech and data providers with Advantage Go's ecosystem. Listening back, this is an almost breathless podcast. But what's remarkable is that it should be breathless for just under an hour. Markel Insurance has been through enormous strategic changes in 2025, and its CEO, Simon Wilson, has been at the heart of them. The reinsurance business has been exited and management structure streamlined. Now that the heavy lifting has been done, this podcast outlines the type of company Simon wants the new revamped Markel to become. The episode is a great advert for the podcasting medium because no amount of words or investor presentations can be anywhere near as expressive and vivid as an executive with a clear vision and the passion and drive to get on and execute. You can hear it in every sentence. Simon also attacks all our conversation topics with equal vigour and gusto. So, digitisation and facilitisation and the rise of portfolio underwriting, the fast growth of MGAs and fronting carriers, as well as the prospects for the US casualty market, are all analysed with great rigour in the coming hour. It's all candid and transparent, everything's out in the open, and nothing is off limits. It's genuinely refreshing to hear the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar premium unit of a public company talk in no-nonsense terms about their business and the market it operates in. I really enjoyed this one, and I think you will too. Enjoy the podcast. Simon, welcome back to the Voice of Insurance.
Mark, great to be back here with you.
And we're in London. I know you're not based in London anymore, you're based over in Richmond. The other Richmond.
Yeah, Richmond, Virginia. Yeah, so I spent a lot of time on the ground in the US, often in Richmond. Less and less time here in London, unfortunately, but great to be here this morning.
Congratulations on that role that has obviously taken you to HQ of the whole group. There's been a lot going on, a lot of restructuring, re-underwriting, re-strategizing. We've been sitting for watching this over the last few quarters. Would it be right to say now that all that heavy lifting is done, or do you think there's still more to go?
We have made a massive amount of change in a relatively short period of time, probably the first 3 or 4 months of my tenure here. And I think the vast majority of transforming the business from what was a matrix structure in the main, certainly over in the US, into distinct P&Ls where we've got leaders sitting on top of every single business unit across Markel Insurance. We've got clarity in terms of who is responsible for what. That change, in addition to focusing on becoming the preeminent specialty insurer on the planet, those things are done. We had to make the difficult decision to sell the renewal rights of Global Re, very much in line with that strategy to become the specialty insurance practice that we're known for now. So that heavy lifting, which was the majority of it, has been done. Now we're going to take people from roles in claims and technology and other parts of our operations and align them with those business units. So there is a job of work to get those people aligned to the businesses which they support very much directly. Those people that used to work at the centre and now they're going to work in those business units. So there's a little bit of work just to ensure that those people go into the right businesses that we've created. But by and large, the vast majority of the changes that we're going to make have been made. And as we go into 2026, we turn the page. We've got some really exciting plans for all of our businesses across the whole of Markel Insurance. So we're going to deploy those plans and execute on the new structure that we've created. Look, there's been an awful lot of change. People have had to deal with that in a short period of time. That's never easy, I think, for individuals that are involved in that change. But if I look back on it now and say, have we become a leaner, more focused organization on the back of all of these changes? 100% yes. So I'm really excited about what the business is going to be able to do going into 2026 and beyond.
I had a conversation with Andreas Berger when he was still running Swiss Re Corporate Solutions. He came in, but his advice was sort of, go early, go quickly. And so everyone knows what's happening straight away, make that decision quickly so there's no uncertainty. Yeah,
none of this stuff is ever easy, but I think if you can do it short, sharp, I think it's really important to be able to communicate why you're doing it to people as well. There's so many stakeholders with a business like Markel. The external stakeholders need to understand it and they need to hopefully to buy into that as well. At least you can be clear with them. But also the internal, our employees as well, needs to be really clear in terms of what we're doing. So when a decision that gets made, maybe not everyone agrees with it, but at least they can understand why that's being made. I think the worst of all worlds comes when things happen, but nobody's got any context for why they might be happening. So we try to be very, very clear in terms of what we're doing it so that people can come along for the ride to the degree that
and you've got the accountability set up that there is someone in charge of every strategic thing you're doing.
So important. So every single kind of P&L that we have now has a leader that sits on the top of it. Where things had gone wrong a little bit, and I've mentioned this in other conversations that I've had, we did that corporate thing when we had a matrix that got so confusing over time that everyone was in charge, but no one was responsible, if that makes sense. And we needed to make that change in terms of saying, no, if we're going to run businesses, we need people who are genuinely responsible, accountable, both financially, but also for the quality of what's going out the front door.
I've always found it difficult to get my head around matrices because it always looks like it's just what you've really done is you've created a kind of committee. Yeah, it's sort of like designed by committee and then everything.
Yeah, and you imagine, so not only have you created something where it's done by committee, but in order for the committees to work, you need more committees, and then it almost becomes like a vicious circle in some respects of decisions not being made where they should be made. I'm very passionate, really passionate about decisions being made as close to the customer as they possibly can be. So everything about the structure is really, if you really boil it down, is how do we get the frontline underwriter or claims professional to be able to make the decision without having to refer it up to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. This is all about, actually, we hired you because we think you know how to underwrite or you know how to negotiate a claim. If we thought that then, we're going to think that now. We're going to trust you a little bit more than maybe you had done in that matrix type structure that just got in the way of you being able to make a decision.
Certainly the worst corporate environment I've ever been in was one where a lot of dictates were coming down at you. And as a conscientious, good employee, you think, goodness me, how can I do all this stuff? There's so many things I need to do that I'm being told I need to do.
Yeah.
And then there was a revelation only about 18 months into that, was that there were no consequences if you didn't do them, which is also kind of depressing. It's like, well, why are we doing this? Well, there's no consequence if you don't do it.
That is such a good point. So I have this thing, Mark, about you get to a Friday and you've worked Monday through Friday and maybe you've worked really hard. How do you know that that's been valued? You've worked really hard, you've done a good job this week. And I think instinctively as a professional in the industry, you kind of know you've done a good job. Well, if no one can see it, if no one ever knows, what's the point? So then, as you just described, it trickles down. You think, well, I'm probably going to try a little bit less hard next week, or what's the point? And ultimately, we come to a situation where the whole organisation becomes a little bit apathetic. And I think I'm not talking about Markel specifically. I think I'm talking about corporates. A really important thing is like, how do you get back that edge? With people when they turn on me. I want to do well. And if I do well, people will recognise it. And it's not always just financially, actually. There's an awful lot of people that just want to be recognised for doing a good job and being a player in a team that's doing really well. And everything that we've been doing within Markel Insurance these past 6 months has been getting that edge back. I've been working with Bain quite a lot. They call it the founder's mentality. And you lose that kind of founder's mentality as you get middle-aged as an organisation and you start to create matrices, structures, committees, all those things creep in. Because the edge that you had when you first started, that real clarity in terms of what your role in life was, it kind of ebbs away over time. And you have to be quite focused on maintaining it.
You come to this role from running international, and obviously I think that was the last time you were on the podcast. And you've been mentioned in dispatches and, saying international's done really, really well. And since I've gone more into detail we've done other podcasts with other executives in international, there is a particular flavour about the way that unit was run. Obviously, it's still performing extremely well and outperforming the rest of the group. Is there anything you're going to bring from that anyone in another part of Markel say, well, I kind of know what's going to come because we can see what they're doing international. Then are you going to sort of export some of that over to the rest of the group?
Certainly, right?
Well, you want the numbers to be exported, certainly.
Well, indeed, that would be great. One of the things about international, and I look back on it and think, actually, that was quite an easy job in some respects to create this type of structure. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean that genuinely, you're forced in a way to have to trust people to run locations across the world, not least because I don't speak German and we've got a big business in Germany. So I don't understand the culture of Germany. I can't speak the language. I don't know the nuances really in detail of that particular marketplace. So for me to go to Germany and tell the German team what to do is frankly ridiculous. So I was able to say, look, the job that I have is to pick the right leader and make sure we've got the right team in place and understand what the business plan is there from that team. But the execution of that has to be done locally and on the ground. Same too for Spain. I know that you speak Spanish well, but so in the majority of cases, Singapore's a long way away. China's a completely different market. Australia, the other side of the planet, the Middle East, again, a very long way away, a completely different marketplace. So in international, I think the reason we were successful is because we almost had to empower the local offices and the local businesses to actually build their own organization over a period of time. So I focused on strategy, leadership, and the quality of business plans that were coming through the front door, and then made sure that in that job, those things were being done. I don't speak New York, and I don't speak Chicago, and I don't speak California either. And I don't understand all of those local marketplaces to the degree necessary to be super successful in a specialty insurance marketplace. So the mentality, whether it's Germany, Madrid, if it's Singapore, I think you can deploy that across the United States of America as well. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with these very specific P&Ls we set up.
But it's definitely not laissez-faire. It's picking the right people and then you're holding their feet to the fire and saying, well, you said you're going to do this. Like, why has this not turned out the way?
Two sides of the coin, empowerment and accountability. And what you lose in that matrix structure that we were talking about earlier is who's really accountable for the performance of that business unit, because everyone's got a reason why it didn't happen, and it tends to be somebody else that didn't perform in that particular circumstance. Well, if you're the sole leader and you've got the empowerment to go and pick your team, to take your products to market and to get the job done, if that job isn't being done, and that comes through both in the numbers, but also we do some NPS scores with the customer, so employee surveys. So if all of these things aren't going particularly well, we know who it is that we need to go and talk to about and try and help that individual. So, well, why is this not working quite so well? So we've got clarity in terms of where things are not performing like they might do. But we also, in the positive sense, if something's flying, we can take a look at that and say, number one, how do we invest in you to make it go faster? And two, how do we take the ideas that are working in that particular part of the business and maybe try and export them somewhere else in a way that makes sense for the local marketplace they're operating in?
Certainly one of the things I was impressed with in the last couple of podcasts I've done with Markel's staff on the international side was that sort of empowerment of the underwriter, making sure the underwriter's got all the tools available, they're all really talking to each other, the actuarial function, the pricing actuaries, they're all on the same computer systems, they can really see, they can be feeding into each other. The actuary's talking to the underwriter's talking to the actuary, and the person who's got the technology, and that they're all sitting around the table trying to make things better.
Yeah.
And that was very refreshing, actually. And it was something I hadn't necessarily seen at scale or talked of at scale with an organisation. Obviously, we know that those numbers, the results are pretty good.
They are. And that feedback loop, if you will. So underwriter makes a decision, claims happen, the claims feed into the actuarial area, and the actuarial and the claims people will all sit down with the underwriters to say, this is where we're actually sitting, and this is where the result is going well, and this is where we're seeing some kind of hot areas in terms of claims. All of that being done in an ecosystem, and it almost just happens naturally now, I think, within those areas. I do think when I've looked at the US business, we did become disjointed between underwriting, claims, actuarial, technology, this sort of siloed functions, if you will, around the insurance organization. We did get a bit siloed in some respects because of geography. So people were just sat literally in different places from one another. And even in the same location, they might be on different floors. And it's amazing. I find it's like, if you're not sat on the same floor, you just don't find the opportunity to go talk to one another.
You don't literally bump into each other at the coffee machine and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And here in the London office where we're sat now, we made a very big decision. We've got 3 floors of the walkie-talkie. We punched holes. So we've got staircases, and we put a cafe area on the lowest floor, the 25th floor here, and people will walk down the stairs, walk to the cafe. We give people free coffee, and so that gets them to go there, and they bump into people. And they speak to people they wouldn't necessarily need. And that actually, the nature of the way that you run your offices, I think, leads a lot to culture within a business.
And I suppose it probably illustrates the way that you could get an underwriter to really think about the whole portfolio of what they're underwriting. You know, they're not just necessarily underwriting a single risk.
Correct.
Of course, but you are underwriting a single risk day to day, minute to minute.
Yeah.
But I suppose ultimately you as their boss, you want them to be thinking about what is that doing to their portfolio. And of course, if they don't talk to the claims and the actuarial and the tech and everybody, and they don't have an ability to see what that's doing to their portfolio sort of in real time, then you're not giving them the tools for the job. But it sort of seems like what you've been able to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, and right now in this marketplace, that is so much more important than in a rock hard market. It's so funny. I was talking to someone the other day. It's like we're having to teach underwriters and broking colleagues, having to teach brokers about how to deal with a soft market. I look back 10 years ago and no one had ever seen a hard market before, in that sort of younger generation. So we had to teach them about the hard market, and now the softening market or that type of situation is new to a number of people. Critical in your portfolio, rate adequacy is really important, but also risk selection. Just because rates might be going up in a particular area, it doesn't make it a good risk or a good right. So that whole price adequacy and the precision around that becomes much more important in these market conditions than in one where it's been rock hard.
Underwriting, there's always the sort of 80% of your portfolio that's the good stuff, and there's 20 that's sort of ephemeral, that's at the margins.
Yeah.
And it's trying to keep that 80% happy and keeping the broker coming back to keep offering you that share of the 80% that you really actually quite like. And the rest of it, you can sort of live without. But it changes all the time.
I agree. And how do you teach AI how to do that one day? I'm not entirely sure just yet. I'm sure we probably get onto that at some point during the conversation. But that artistry of the relationship between the broker and the underwriter, and the knowledge that we're doing this deal on these terms because of the other 80%, the scientists would say you shouldn't do that. But the trading individual understands why that is being done for more of a medium long-term approach and the importance of staying in the game to some regard. And that's a learned experience, I think.
I'm not sure AI will, yes, it needs to learn about what a watching line is and all that kind of stuff that we know about.
True. But so I suppose it will learn about it. But the trust dynamic that you look at the party across the table, say, like, I'll do this deal because I know I can trust you because we've traded together for 10 years. And when the good times come, all that 80% keeps coming round, leg me over.
If you do a favour for a broker and they said, well, lots of really good stuff's coming around the corner, I can look at my next set of renewals. And if they don't actually show them to you, well, I'm not doing you a favour again.
Yeah, I think both parties kind of understand that whole thing. So all of the precision and the rate adequacy is really important. But when you were describing that portfolio approach, that is a very, very nuanced thing. And it certainly isn't all about doing favours the whole time. I mean, that doesn't make sense. But there is a sort of an understanding and a trust between the two parties in that transaction.
Yeah, we might as well talk about all of that, because actually, where do you think the best applications of AI have been?
So AI, massive topic, isn't it? I mean, and share prices in the States in particular are flying on the back of this new technology. And it is amazing. I mean, it's only probably 2.5 years ago or something like that when ChatGPT came in, when the wider world became really aware of what this AI was all about. We've done 3 things within Markel around AI. The first one was sort of base up. We gave every single person in the company Copilot, so the Microsoft product. So just to get people working alongside it, because everyone's doing a spreadsheet, everyone's doing a PowerPoint presentation, everybody's doing the Teams meetings, and they want the notes coming on the back of that in a real one-pager, and they can do all of it. So to get people in the modus operandi of AI, we gave everybody Copilot. I think we're the first insurer in the world to do that. So that's interesting, and I think people will bubble up in terms of just general capability.
Once you've had it summarising your meetings and sort of saying who said what and what was agreed and sort of sending that to everybody, you're never going to go back again, are you?
So that is a really productive thing. I mean, it's been very beneficial. The second thing, which is a bit more insurance specific, is data ingestion has been a big thing that we're doing. So just the quality of getting something off a slip and into our system, that takes a lot of time and mistakes often get made. If we can get AI to do that, and the quality of the information that's being transcribed onto our system is better than we've ever done it before, and it's quicker, productivity is good, but it really is table stakes to a great degree. I mean, I expect most people in the market will be doing that type of process efficiency, data ingestion. So got to do it, but our share price isn't going to double on the back of doing something like that, but we do need to do it overall. Where I get really excited, and the third kind of level, I think, of the application of AI is really when we start looking at the underwriting decision-making that's being done. And a great example of it that we've got in the business at the moment is our warranties and indemnities practice here in London. Imagine underwriting a W&I risk. You're essentially sitting in the seat of the buyer and making sure that they haven't missed anything in due diligence. That's the promise that you're making, because if something goes wrong in that transaction and they're financially impaired, that's where we step in, and so long as the trigger's gone off in the contract, we will step into the shoes and put them right. Now, in order to do that, you have to read a massive data room. So that's essentially what you're doing. You're being a lawyer on the buy side of a transaction, and you're looking through all the different financials and all the different legal documents and all that type of stuff in this huge data room and saying, yep, we're happy that all the warranties that are being made are fair and fit for purpose and all the rest of it, and this is the price. Well, to do that, you have to have a pretty expensive underwriter that's doing the work, somewhat legally qualified in that area.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not for everyone, is it?
Takes time to go through all of that documentation, and then ultimately we issue a quote, and we may win 1 in 4. Now, it might take you a week to go through a data room. If you win 1 in 4 that you quote, that means you've done a month's work to tie up one W&I contract from a premium perspective. So what happens typically is that you go for the larger deals, because that's the economics mean that you're spending that much money and getting the deal over the line, that you're going to go for those larger deals. Well, what if, and that's what we've deployed now as an AI solution called Harvey, what if you can have an AI solution that reads the data room on your behalf? So you have to be very clever with the question that you're asking the AI to answer. So the prompt essentially that you're writing in the machine, that's where the skill really is. But then you get this really nice report on 3, 4, 5 pages that say, well, if you'd read every single document in here and this is your brain because you put the prompt in there, this is what you'd have found off the back of it. Well, the Harvey can read that in less than 10 minutes. So rather than a week that it to take you as an underwriter, and you probably haven't read every document, and you probably haven't noticed that file number 500 of the financials don't quite equal file number 250. Well, the AI does that, and it does that really well. So then our people can then sit there and say, we can make a better decision now because we've got what we need from the AI device, so we can make a better decision, and we can clearly do it a lot quicker because we haven't done that week's worth of work on the way through. So that to me is really interesting. So number one, we can be more productive. Number two, we can now start looking at smaller deals. And we think the smaller deals in that particular market are probably more profitable than the larger ones. There's less competition, and there's, sort of the volatility that goes alongside it, and the triggers that tend to come through slightly less. So really exciting deployment of AI in our industry in an area which is pretty high growth. So more and more companies, when they do a trade, are looking for W&I coverage if they can get it.
It's such an interesting class, isn't it? Because it's one of these ones where everyone's kind of winning. The buyer's happy, the buyer of the product's happy, that the buyer and seller of this company are happy, and you should be happy. Obviously, you should be ultimately making a decent underwriting return.
When you say buyer, that's really important, buyer and seller. If you're sitting on the board of a buyer and you make a mistake, then that could be a D&O.
Yeah.
So you always want to buy this kind of coverage because it's protecting you from your own insurance perspective on that D&O side. So yeah, I think it's just something that's going to grow in time, but we need to be able to do that way more efficiently than you do. When you buy a house, you never get there with a lawyer that says everything's going to be fine now. There's always that little rump of stuff where you go like, look, I can't make a decision one way or the other. It's on you, the buyer, to take this risk. And of course, then you have title insurance that comes with it and all the rest of it. So we've seen it happen in the personal lines market. Yep. And I think there's only going to grow in that commercial space in W&I.
Actually, we also talk about, while we're here sort of on this technology, something that technology has enabled in the London market to start with has been this portfolio underwriting, smart follow, what do you want to call it, facilitisation, a lot of the broker flow, for example. You've started looking at that. You've been involved in that.
Yeah.
Are you happy with it? Anything that starts in London can end up being exported around the world. And certainly I've seen some of the facilities, some of the very big global brokers starting to become not just London.
Yeah.
Anyway, what's your assessment so far of what's this done for you?
So I think you've got to be realistic about how the market's gone. I think with the size of the market, and I think some of the technology that's been able to be deployed, and the economics of the market as well, those three things almost naturally lead to facilitisation. I mean, you see it in most other industries, and why would insurance be different? Now, often you would say, well, it's a soft market thing, isn't it? Where you just lump all of this stuff in. Certainly used to be. And there will be an element of facilitisation where risks are able to go into a facility because it's a softer market than if it was a rock hard market. So I think there's a slight ebb and flow in that. But I do think with people like Key coming into the market, which has been a really interesting new way of thinking, I think, within the marketplace, or deployment of that type of thinking at least, I think that's been a really interesting change in what's being done. And I think that brokers absolutely are committed to having these facilities that are being created in London in particular. Two types of facilities that I see here. You've got the large portfolio, whole portfolio type facility. So ACT being the main one, but there's a number of other ones.
The top 10 brokers have all got their own version of something similar.
Precisely. Yeah. ACT probably a little bit further along than most, have been going for a long, but most other brokers, as you say now, are in there. We do participate on some of those. And I think a couple of things that come out of that, well, clearly there's scale. So you can access that portfolio. You've got scale and
you've got instant diversification.
Diversification is really important. That's the other part of it. As long as it is diversified, because the problem that you get is it starts diversified and then you end up a couple of years later and it's like, well, why is this 60, 70% cap? That becomes a bit of an issue. So we do keep a close eye on making sure that that diversification does remain in those facilities as they go through. But not only do you get that diversification in the scale fairly quickly, you also, if your data team is quite strong, for a 1% share on the facility, you get 100% of the data.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. So you start to see claims trends and you start to see, well, what layers are working, what other layers aren't. So we can use what we find in the facilities and the underwriting that's being done there. We can deploy that in our open market underwriting as well. So we get really excited about the amount of data that's coming alongside some of those large facilities. The second type of facility that we see are more of the class of business. So we've been on Pearl, which is the Marsh Energy facility. We're on Slipstream, which is the Marsh Marine facility. So these are where you need specific levels of expertise in a particular class of business, but it is a kind of a fast follow, semi-automated type of facility. We really like those because they exist in classes of business where we feel we do have leading capability. So there's a degree to which we will lead those facilities, and we can tinker with the dials a little bit, in terms of how much marine liability versus hull versus cargo will go into that Marsh Marine facility. And we'll work with the broker to make sure that that is well diversified and leveled to a degree. Whereas when you've got a whole portfolio, it's a little bit more difficult to get to the nuts and bolts of what's going on there. So the class of business specific facilities is something that we've really lent into with a number of brokers now, and ones where we think we can deploy our knowledge and skill base to make those facilities better. Because I don't think the brokers now want to be in a situation where those facilities just go off in a puff of smoke because the performance of those facilities are so poor. Because if they lose that, I think it does create issues for their economics within the broker longer term if people move away from
it. I suppose ultimately it's for the good of all, ultimately.
Correct.
If we can make it work, because we've got a $100 billion market, we can't make it a $200 billion market and have to double the expense base. It's not physically possible, I don't think.
You asked me the question at the start, is this a London thing or can this go global? I think it starts in London because the nature of the capital that's here. So you've got many markets and the facility, you can say, look, and the ACT thing, do you want to write 1% or 1.5%? No, it's a small line, but it's still meaningful premium volumes. And you've got enough markets that are able to come together to create a facility that works in London. You've also got the licensing here, which is so strong. You go elsewhere and suddenly the licensing is a bit more clunky. And in Europe, obviously, you've got access to the European Union. So there's definitely something you could put together there. US, 50 states, 50 regulators, is admitted businesses and not admitted business. So there's quite a lot more administration required in other parts of the world than there is naturally in London. That said, with fronting now beginning to take hold in the US, for example, you can use a front and then an offshore reinsurance capacity. We've seen that in a number of areas, certainly in the last 2 years, where that's become a bit more of a trend. It's a bit more difficult to do, but by no means impossible.
Ultimately, that gross number has got to be under 100. Otherwise, if you're sitting holding the baby at the end as well, well, it's all very much fun, but I'm going to turn the taps off.
Yeah, and in fact, you'll tend to find that if it goes materially over 100, the taps all get turned off at once. And that then the ultimate customer is going like, well, what happened here? I've now got my price has gone up double and all the rest of it. So it creates inefficiencies in the market if we're not careful.
There's an ultimate alignment of interest for everyone needs to make these things work, because otherwise they just won't be there anymore and then we'll miss them when they're gone.
And I do think now with the technology and with the data analytics, and I think the brokers have invested in that, and I know that Markel has for sure, we're in a much better place than we were 10 years ago to make sure that those wild variations don't tend to happen. We can stay ahead of it a little bit more.
It's certainly back in the old days, every time you had another link in the chain, you had 10 points and you had at least 3 or 4 months before you found out what the hell was going on.
Correct.
And also, cash flows, we didn't even get the money either.
Yeah.
Back that was 20, 30 years ago. You're adding treacle to something, and now it's more like you're adding oil.
Yeah, I know, but it's more modern. It doesn't mean that it's perfect. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get a bad year. But I feel as though this is a structure which is very important to the ongoing success of London. And I think the more that we can invest to understand how to do this well, I think that's going to pay back.
Yeah, because ultimately it's going to make us more relevant, more competitive.
Right.
It's going to make us more efficient, and it's going to improve returns on capital ultimately, which is another good thing. So we can get more capital when we need it.
Yeah, exactly.
I better bring it all back to Markel. So now, going forward, you want to be thought of a specialty insurance company. And when I think of specialty insurance, I always think of wholesale channels, but not necessarily. Is that right to say that it'll be retail channels when it's appropriate?
Yeah, so what do we want to be known as? So I mentioned before, we want to be known as the preeminent specialty insurance company on the planet. So when people think, I want to go and access knowledge, people that know what they're doing from a claims perspective, people that can add a little bit from a data front, they just know more because they've invested in that. If Markel is top of mind when they're thinking about who do I want to go and speak to, the broker says, I'm going to have a really good conversation with the person sitting across the desk. When my customer has a claim, these people know what it is to write equine insurance or really difficult casualty insurance or a peculiar profession that happens to be going somewhere in the middle of America. The conversation I want to be having is with someone from Markel. Then we've done our job. So it's more about being that top of mind, being very relevant. It's not just difficult to place risks. It's areas where we've invested in having expertise that other people who are playing a big scale game and just doing everything, that's not the way that they go to market. So we will differentiate ourselves in that regard. Where do we go to on the back of that mentality? Well, I look across the world, and in the States, we've got a reasonably large market share, or a decent market share in the US E&S segment, which is good, but it could be better. It's probably gone down in the last couple of years. I want to sort of rectify that and take us back to the preeminent player in that area as well. But pretty much everywhere else in the world, our market share is something like 1%, or not even, or even less than 1% of the commercial insurance segment in a particular territory in which we trade. Well, imagine, you just went from 0.5% to 1%. We can double our premium income, and we're still a relatively small player within that marketplace. So I think the runway for growth within specialty insurance in terms of market share is there. And by the way, the world isn't becoming less complex today than it was previously. The number of specialty risks that are coming across the desk is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, every market in which we trade. And so I just think the opportunity is very significant. And to your point about wholesale or not wholesale, we don't want to back ourselves into a corner and just say, we can only trade through these particular brokers. What we won't do, and I think what we've pulled back from, is selling genuine wholesale products into retail channels. I think the moment you start doing that, the wholesaler gets annoyed by it. I can understand why. I'm not sure how much value we're actually adding to that retail channel now. It's because the wholesale channel is so sophisticated in the United States. I think whereas a wholesale monoline product over there, we're best served by offering that in the wholesale channels. But we're very aware that other products that we sell are well placed to be sold through retail channels as well. So we'll sell through both, but we'll be hopefully quite intelligent about where we deploy.
Yeah, and some of the wholesale products, they just don't fit really into a retail model because it's just probably not efficient.
And you look at the wholesale brokers now, particularly in the United States. So I think about Amwins, Ryan Specialty, CRC. They've invested so much to get all of these people that. So if you've got a specific type of property risk in Florida, the person you need to speak to in order to get that placed is John Smith, and he happens to work for, Amwins or something like that. It's like that's who people go to because they've got so much knowledge, deep knowledge about that particular risk in that particular county in Florida. You're probably not going to have done that in the retail market because it's just so specific that there's only 1, 2, or 3 of those people that are actually available and they're working somewhere else. So it's probably more efficient as a retail broker to put that into the wholesale market, which is why the wholesalers have been successful the last few years.
What's the demand situation? You get a good view. You've got a very good view of that. Obviously, we've got the change in the market. Are the business flows still holding up? I suppose the big difference for me between a softening market and a really soft market is in a really soft market, actually, the demand falls off a cliff and suddenly you don't see any brokers queuing up to see you anymore.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic this year on submission flow. And it is different depending on what class of business. So property is the one that a lot of people are talking about at the moment. Yeah. The submission flow into the E&S market is still really strong.
Yeah.
But the level of competition within that marketplace is also high. So it's like there's plenty of opportunity. It's just that, the pricing competition, I think, is pretty significant. Certainly in brokerage property, that's where we're seeing that. I think in the smaller binding type property, it's not so pronounced. There's not that type of thing going on. Casualty is different. Casualty is a really, really difficult market. It's a very nuanced market, lots of different types of casualty that's going on. But in general, the casualty market rightly remains hard. So certainly double-digit rate increases that we're seeing through this year on the back of double-digit rate increases last year as well. The question is that keeping up with trend? I mean, that's the question. And in different parts of that casualty market, we're seeing different rate increases and different levels of demand. I'm not seeing in the wholesale market it drop off a cliff. And I think the reason for that is structural, and that a lot of the customers that have moved into that wholesale market are saying, well, actually, the rate does go up and down depending on the risk that's being shown, and the forms that I can get are actually more in line with a customer's need than the ones that we're getting in the admitted marketplace. So I think the customer is actually driving some of this as well, to saying, like, I quite like that policy over there because it fits the purpose that I need it to fit.
Yes.
And so there's demand for that, I think.
It's a better product, and so people will still come and get. And the main thing is that an underwriter can't underwrite what they're not being shown.
Yep.
So as long as you are being shown, and our wholesale space is getting that showing that it was having before, okay, it's more competitive, but it's not the same as not being shown.
Correct. And I think as long as you're being shown it, at least we can make a decision on that basis. You're in the game.
Point, yes. Talking about casualty, I suppose any time in the last 10 to 15 years, if you'd asked me, what was Markel what would I know them for? I'd say they're a really strong casualty. They're probably more casualty than a property player. I'd have said, as a broker, that's what you're known for. Would you want to still present that as sort of one of your credentials? Any casualty class, you've been writing it for years and you have that expertise, let's say.
So I think certainly the DNA of the company, I would say professional and casualty. So there's a third party is definitely something that's synonymous with Markel, less so first party. I do think if you look now, the international business has grown so much, and we're very strong in energy, we're very strong in marine, we've got a decent cyber offering, which I guess is kind of third party as well. I do think we've broaden that specialty. So I wouldn't want to come across as almost entirely casualty or something along those lines. But you're right to say, like, you think of Markel, casualty would be something that you would feel was quite synonymous with the way that the company knows. We've got a lot of history in casualty over a long period of time. So we've got good data, and we've been through tough times and good times in that particular area. I would say the US casualty market, well, it's been more difficult than the property market, certainly these past 2 or 3 years. And we always think about the last 2 or 3 years. In casualty, it's not the last 2 or 3 years. We're looking at 19 and prior was the initial kind of issue that cropped up probably 2022, 2023, that you started seeing that coming through. And then people felt, because you go through COVID and prices went up, and the number of court cases in that kind of 2021 period went down. 2021 feels okay. I think we're looking at the data now, we and the market in general looking at data and thinking, I'm not sure if the prices actually were adequate during that 2021, even 22 period of time. So there's an awful lot of work to be done in the US casualty marketplace. And I don't know how often you're out there. Obviously, I'm there on a regular basis now, but you turn the television on and the ads that come on the break, it used to be various medicines that you could get, which were like 5 seconds of it will help you from whatever ailment you have, and then the next 25 seconds
of the disclaimer.
Yeah, it
makes you feel drowsy and nauseous and whatever else.
All that type of thing. So that was the ad that you used to see. And now the majority of ads are actually for the law firms that are looking to get people money from traffic collisions and that type of thing over there. And it's like, oh, and we just got 100 million, or we got 250 million, or we can, there's very, very big numbers, especially in that wheels type transportational casualty, which are frightening. And now that we've seen some of those nuclear verdicts, or whatever you want to call them, coming through, that stokes the demand for other people to say, well, I'd quite like a shot, maybe getting that kind of number, not least if you're a lawyer, but certainly people that have been injured in these accidents. And that has fueled investment and private equity coming into the marketplace. So this has become a very different game than what we had in the teens, if you will, sort of like 10 years ago. We're now in a marketplace where people are coming with significantly larger sums of money to go head to head and take things to court if they possibly can get them there. So I think casualty is a different game now than it has been previously. Have we got it right? Difficult to say, but I think the industry needs to be very, very thoughtful about how it goes about underwriting casualty, because we go back to the 1990s, I'm sure you're aware, there's a time when people just couldn't get cover anymore.
Yes.
And we don't want to end up in that type of situation. So we have to be thoughtful now about how we underwrite, but also how we handle claims. If people just give up because they're on the primary layer, and they're saying, well, it's going to go through my layer, therefore I'll put my hands up, you end up with some excess player being the person that's having to effectively litigate on the claim. And they might not be best placed to do that. So I think everybody's figuring out where it is that the claim's going to come and how we are going to deal with that claims environment in the US.
This is a political process, ultimately. People could all be on the side of the plaintiff, against the big corporate, perhaps sort of, in their head. And it's only when your local swimming pool shuts down because they can't get liability insurance, or you can't see a doctor, or, you can't see, obstetrician, then it starts to come home to people, and then they might start writing letters to their senator or whatever.
Indeed. And unfortunately, it often takes that, because right now, if you put tort reform at the top of your bill, if you were trying to be elected or something like that in a particular state, I can't imagine that's going to go down that well with the electorate. So it's a really difficult thing. But we have to be better. I think the ability for us to talk to Washington and the politicians there and sort of like really get them to understand that, all of these things getting closed down eventually is not good for society. I think they do understand that. It's just where the priority kicks in. But we as an industry, for the time being, need to be very thoughtful about the coverages that we're giving out. And I think certainly when it comes down to the claims, I think we need to be somewhat more joined up in terms of like, well, hang on, let's not just give up on every claim that comes across the desk here, because there are some that are very valid. There are others that should be contested, and to set a precedent going the other way to say that we're not always going to give up.
In terms of that perception of Markel, of course, you have de facto that fantastic experience, a deep experience in casualty, which is highly valuable. But generally, you want to be known as a specialty player in first and third party, property, marine, every other class, presumably.
We have to be.
You want that balance, right?
Yeah, we do. I think balance is really important. It's a good word. I think it's always good in hindsight, isn't it? We were underweight property the last 3 years. Wish we'd have done lots more. If there were 3 mega hurricanes that hit America in the last 3 years, we'd have been overweight property. So it's, that is just it's a little bit hindsight. But I think the pricing environment was so strong. I think looking back on it, we could and should have written more. We're underweight workers' comp. So if you look at it's amazing that run that workers' comp's had over in the US. A lot of people are able to almost subsidize the reserves that they're putting up on casualty with the takedown that they're seeing in workers' comp. So we do have a workers' comp practice. It's really good. I just wish it was a little bit bigger. I think we've been underweight surety. So there's areas where you think we've got these capabilities, but what I'm looking to do in this role is to scale those areas which are genuine specialties. And I think we're going to invest in that. We'd like to bring new teams of people and we can extend the product coverage. We could potentially have a bolt-on acquisition that comes along in terms of just really balancing that portfolio out. So yeah, I don't think if you're going into specialty insurance, you can then say, and we're only going to write this tiny little section of specialty insurance. I think certainly with a company of our size and scale, we do need to look across most classes that exist within the specialty insurance sphere.
You mentioned about M&A. Would it be right to assume that given the scale you've already got and the fact that you've been re-strategizing, restructuring, refocusing, the way that the market cycle seems to have given us a season of M&A, and sometimes it's just down to timing that, the timing was about 5 years ago. Lots of new companies were capitalized and with a sort of capital that likes to seek an exit after 5 to 7 years. Some of it's that kind of thing. It's just a coincidence, but others is more cyclical.
Yeah.
Given where you are, would it be right just to assume what you just said about bolt-on acquisitions making sense, but generally in the big acquisition space doesn't sound like where you want to be?
I honestly think with the platform that we've got now and the reorganization of that platform we talked about earlier, the scope for organic growth in the business. And by the way, people always talk about soft market and hard market, and we're not going to look to write silly risks in a soft market by any stretch of the imagination. But I just think there's enough runway for us to be able to organically grow pretty strongly. We have this year, we bought MECO earlier this year, which was a marine liability specialty player here in London. Yeah. It was a product that we didn't have. We wanted to add that to our marine capability, which is really strong in the London marketplace. And we went ahead and bought MECO back in, I think it was March of this year. So we've done a bolt-on acquisition now. That's probably $60, $70 million worth of premium within a very specialized MGA environment. And we're now putting the balance sheet Markel behind that MGA, but keeping all the great stuff that team does. So love that type of thing where you're able to add something and it does either bring distribution or new products.
That you had been trading with for a long time anyway.
Correct. So you've got that, longevity, and we've done that. And when we've gone into new countries, often we've purchased an MGA to go in there because they've already got the distribution, and we can look at the underwriting and say, if we were to add the balance sheet on the back of that distribution, you get a double win off the back of it. Plus you're in a country and away you go. So I certainly wouldn't say we're not open to that type of acquisition. Yeah. That very large scale, double the size of the company type thing, we're not there at the moment. That wouldn't be one for us. I think not least because if you look at the valuations of some of these insurance companies going into slightly more difficult market conditions, we're pretty highly priced for then having to deal with more difficult market conditions. So maybe you give it 2 or 3 years, or sort of never say never type thing. There might well be a movement in terms of pricing where some people have had a difficult cat season or something along those lines. So I would say never, but it's certainly not by no means like top of my agenda at the moment. We need to get the organic growth right.
See, having pulled out of reinsurance, you've got that frees up capital. I suppose it's difficult. I don't want to ask you questions that are not necessarily in your purview to answer, but are you able to redeploy that capital? Do you think you've got enough space and runway to deploy that capital today?
So just to clarify, on the reinsurance, we sold the reinsurance rights.
Right. You put that into runoff, though.
Oh, we've put it into runoff. So
you don't get a capital lift straight away, but as it runs off, you do.
Give it a few years, and we've got this kind of trickle of capital coming down.
You've got a trickle of capital that's freed up as those liabilities are extinguished.
Correct. So, for example, we've just named a new business unit within our Programs and Solutions division. It's called Bermuda. Funny enough, and that does Bermuda. And we've been really strong in Bermuda on professional lines for a fairly long period of time now. Property and casualty lines of business, we've done them, but we've never really focused and said, well, what is the market opportunity in someone like Bermuda for those types of lines of business? Well, now we've called it Bermuda, we've put a leader on top of Bermuda and asked that strategic question, what could we do? We've got quite exciting plans in order to maybe grow that Bermudan platform over the next 2-3 years. So that will require capital. So as that reinsurance capital becomes available, we might do that in the insurance market of Bermuda. There's a technology solution that we're putting into our personal lines business in Wisconsin under a guy called Jeff May. Computer systems don't come cheap these days. So again, it's a great investment in a really nice part of our business. But rather than just going to the bank of Tom Gaynor, who runs Markel Group, and saying, can I have a load more capital? We can pay for that ourselves within Markel Insurance. I think it's really important. So there are plenty of places that we can go and deploy that capital. And I quite like the idea of that reinsurance capital becoming available over time, because rather than having this big glut where you think, I'm just going to spend it all at once, we'll actually be quite thoughtful about where we deploy that over a sort of a short to medium time period.
No, that's really good. But obviously, on that bigger question, and forgive me if this is a group question, it's a Tom question. Obviously, Nephila is not part of your purview. That reports into HQ, to the group. But having put Markel Re into runoff and sold the renewal rights, I mean, does that put any question mark around Nephila itself?
I think there's a big distinction between what Nephila is and what Markel Global Re was.
Yeah.
So Global Re, certainly the business that I inherited, was, I've gone on record as saying this, it was about $1.2 billion, own balance sheet, predominantly casualty professional lines in the US. So we didn't have property coming in there. We actually put that into Nephila a few years ago. So a $1.2 billion reinsurer doing casualty professional lines, just in my view, wasn't at scale to be able to have any leverage in those debates that you have with a broker. So it felt like in order to get to a point where you had relevance within the market, you probably need to get to $5 billion over time, at least. And that would have taken a lot of effort, a lot of capital, all the rest of it. And our strategy is to become the leading specialty insurer in the marketplace. So those two things were incongruous. You just couldn't do both at the same time. So Markel Global Re gets sort of placed into runoff because strategically it wasn't part of my vision as to what we wanted to take the balance sheet organization to. Nephila is different. Nephila is third-party capital. That's number one. So we're adding kind of value in the underwriting process, but we're not taking that on our own balance sheet to a great degree. I think we've got a small investment in the underwriting of Nephila, but the majority is going to third-party capital. So that's number one. Secondly, Nephila is very much a relevant player within the ILS marketplace. Everyone quotes Nephila as being, sort of like Frank Majors and Greg Hager. They started
like so many things. It was VJ Dowling. There was a cartoon. One of the VJ Dowling IBNRs was it was the Nephila gorilla.
Yeah.
We used to have it on the wall of the Insurance Insider office when I was still working there. It's at least twice as big now, so yes.
Yeah, and so I give all that background because I think Nephila is a different proposition than Markel Global Re. So given all of that, I think we look at Nephila very, very differently.
Be a gorilla, don't be a little chimp.
I certainly wouldn't want to disparage what Global Re were doing. And I think the tie-up that we had with Ryan Specialty, isn't it? So Ryan Re and the nationwide balance sheet that sits behind it was great for Ryan Re. I can see strategically why they wanted to get into it, and nationwide as well. And for our people, the majority of whom went along with the transaction, I think it gives them an opportunity to go and grow their own books of business over a period of time. So it's one of those nice
nationwide
stories.
It's got an enormous balance sheet.
Nationwide, huge balance sheet. They got access to the international markets. So we've got a team over here in London and additional scale within that US marketplace too. So I think that was a win-win transaction overall. But I think that was peculiar to the balance sheet that we were writing on and the Markel decision, Nephila being different.
And of course, as Markel, you can get as much casualty as you want on the insurance side too.
Yeah, that was the other part of it, because it's not an easy market. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So if you're not in an easy market on the primary side of things, on the insurance side of things, you're then relying and you're backing people that are underwriting it elsewhere and probably paying a little bit more to access that business on the way through as well. So playing one side is difficult. Playing two sides is almost impossible.
One side, it's very, very clear to everybody what you're doing, and there absolutely can't be any conflicts.
And come back to the very beginning of this conversation when we're trying to simplify what we do and how we do it and what we are going to market. That to me was a very, very straightforward decision in terms of that as simplification. And I think overall, financially, it will benefit us over time as well.
You mentioned about that growth in the hybrid carriers, and obviously they've grown on the back of, we've had a great boom into E&S. We've also had a parallel boom of distribution via MGAs, delegated authority. What's your view on that? One, can the growth continue in that? And strategically, what's your position on it?
On the MGA space in particular?
On backing MGAs, on, obviously everybody backs MGAs to a greater or lesser extent, but some to quite a materially lesser extent, some materially to a greater extent.
So MGAs, again, it's a big topic, and certainly the last 5 years it's become a bigger and bigger topic. Why do people go to MGAs? I think a little bit it means that they can run their own destiny to a greater degree than if they're in a big matrixed insurance environment that we talked about before. So it's kind of like you get maybe a bit fed up with just the big corporate thing that sits behind you, and you can go and do your own thing.
There's a certain type of person who's entrepreneur enough to take that risk, and these days you don't need a huge amount of capital to do it, and there's a whole ecosystem of people to help you. And you say, well, if I'm a good underwriter and I can monetize my good underwriting, at that part of the value chain, why not?
Why not? And what you do hear a lot of is the success stories in MGAs. I do say that to some people every now and then.
But it's not for everyone.
It's not for everyone. So you look at the MGA environment, some people are fit for it and they're going to do a great job in that area. Others maybe belong somewhere else. So our job as insurers is to pick the ones where you say that they are genuinely bringing something to the party. Specific distribution that you don't see because they're in a different country, they speak a different language. It might be just genuine product expertise and a vast experience of just being in that market for a long period of time. They're an excellent underwriter who people trust and the brokers want to go to. They're just going to get followed, and they'll bring a team with them as well, are really, really exceptional. So exceptional distribution, local knowledge and understanding, or just an exceptional personal team of people that have gone and they've just gone together, and you think, well, why wouldn't you back that? Because we don't have that experience in the building, so let's go and back that type of thing. So high quality, differentiated platforms for MGA, really like them. The rest, my argument would be, why would we be giving our balance sheet to people that either aren't quite as good as we are or aren't as good as what we should be? You know, we should be questioning ourselves, I think, sometimes as insurance companies to say, well, why are we not doing that ourselves? Sometimes I come back to the corporate nature of some of the big insurers and the fact that people just get a bit fed up being within them. Well, my job is to bring a little bit of that entrepreneurial mentality into this business here. So best of both worlds. I've got permanent capital, permanent balance sheet, really nice culture, and I'm going to give you a bit of the business to run, and your performance is going to be paid for on the performance of your buck within this building. And you can build a long-term business by doing that. So I would like to bring some of that kind of entrepreneurialism into this building rather than forever seeing the drift out to those MGAs.
Because you get the upside, but you do also have that protection against the downside. And most people would be right to describe that I have more job security at a balance sheet underwriter than I do as an MGA. It could be precarious if things go wrong. Obviously, it will be. No one's going to renew my paper eventually.
And that trade-off is a real one. And I think people haven't, certainly in the last 5 years, you hear these stories of everyone getting these tens of million payouts, whatever it is that people talk about. And we haven't seen that difficult market when capacity is withdrawn from an MGA. And sometimes that happens because of what the MGA has done and they've underperformed and haven't made profit and all the rest of it. Sometimes it's got nothing to do with that particular MGA. Isn't it? Wrong place, wrong time. But the result is the same in that if you don't have any paper to write on, you've got no business anymore. And however much the broker likes you, if they've got no product, then obviously you can't sell it. So don't want to be like the bearer of bad news or putting fear into people. I love entrepreneurialism, but there is a trade-off that people make when they decide to go and do that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And yes, if you can really focus on making this a great place to work where you get the rewards and you get a lot of the upside, then you say, well, why would I bother faffing about starting my own company? But there's some people who are always going to do that anyway.
For sure. And I'm glad they do.
Because you can back them, yeah.
And Markel started its life as an MGA back in 1930. So, you can, over time, if it's successful enough, you can turn to a balance sheet company ultimately. That hasn't been the trend recently, but we'll see it. So we do back MGAs. We continue to look for them, but we look for excellence when we do that.
The one thing I haven't talked about is something we've been talking about almost in the round. When change is happening and you're instigating some of that change is just happening all around us, and we have to react to that change in the way that the tech and AI and all these other things have been happening around us. And of course, there's just the nature of risks themselves are changing. But people don't tend to like change very much. And as a leader, how do you bring them along with you? That softer side of what you're doing, where's your strategy on that? I mean, it's one of those things that you can see it, but it's very hard to articulate.
It's always a thing with a leader. You're expected to bring about change. If nothing ever changed, I don't know, would we still be writing on tablets of stone or something like that? But when people say, I don't really like change, it becomes very general and saying, I don't like it because it's different. And I get that because people come into work one day, they get comfortable or they understand how everything works, and then suddenly a few things get thrown up in the air. I've got a different boss. The computer system doesn't do what it used to do, and it's all new and all the rest of it. So I can understand that it's a little bit unsettling for people, in general. So I can understand that sort of somewhat generalization about change. But without it, things don't grow. That's the long and short of this thing. So what are we doing? I think you're putting in change. As I said at the very outset, we've got to communicate why we're doing it. I think if people can understand the rationale that you're doing, so we're trying to become the preeminent specialty insurer on the planet. In order to do that, we need to focus on specialty insurance. So we decided we're going to make a few changes in terms of reinsurance and the rest of it. We want to get away from a matrix structure where you didn't know who was in charge and who was making decisions to absolute clarity in terms of who's going to be responsible for certain areas of the business. We'll put our financials against that new model so we can see who's being successful and who needs some help in those areas. And we're going to invest in people who've got great plans in the future and want to bring new teams in. Now, if we can articulate it to that degree, people just say, well, I still don't like change. I said, well, come along, give it a go. Give us 12 months and let's see if we can turn the thing around. The one biggest thing that carries you through, Mark, as you'll well know, is results. If we can start putting some runs on the board, people are saying, oh, this thing that they've done, it's amazing. It's working. I'd like to be a part of that. And it won't just be people in this building, but people from the outside will start to come and want to be part of Markel as well. And we found that with Markel International. So Markel International 5-6 years ago was a little bit of a backwater in London, especially.
Yeah, let's say it was average, I think. Was it fair to say?
Yeah.
That literally, if you looked at the numbers, it was never really outperforming on anything and did most things.
Yeah. And then suddenly we're here now 5-6 years down the track and we genuinely have unbelievable momentum here. It's really exciting. People that want to come and join, people who have joined, people that are doing really nice things now when they're here. Well, that's what we want to get going across the whole Markel Insurance organization. And I think once people see that start to work and they're part of it, I think that's when they say, actually, I quite like this change. But at the very outset, when things are just different, that's the hardest period of time that we go through. We had Q3 last week. I was over in the States to go and do that, and that went fairly well. We need to do that in Q4 and Q1 and Q2 next year. So,
you do 20 quarters in a row like that, then everyone gets it.
That'll be amazing. I'll take that for sure.
That's really good. Yeah, change, not just for the sake of it, which is always the worst kind. That always feels like rearranging ditches on the Titanic type change. This is change with a purpose, and then you can see the results of it. Then that's the best kind.
Absolutely. And you look at sports teams, and if sports teams lose games time and time again, the attendance goes down at the grounds and nobody watches on TV. As soon as they start winning again, everyone's buying the shirts and that type thing, aren't they? And it's a little bit similar, I think, in our game. And I do view it, actually, what was really exciting about this is becoming competitive again, sort of being out there and trying to beat the next guy. It's an appeal to that, and I think it does get the juices flowing.
There's one of these things that goes viral with Roger Federer. He's getting an honorary degree somewhere. It's a speech, and he says, you do realise, I won all these titles on every Grand Slam known to man, whatever, hundreds of them, but I only won 53% of my points.
Amazing.
It's just, if I went off and sort of tore my hair out and sort of, destroyed my racket every time I lost one of those 47% of all the points that I played, it's just a marginal difference between winning and losing. Even when you add it up in a game like tennis.
It's gone quite well for Roger Federer.
It goes well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Simon, well, I really wish you well. For one thing, you're going to be incredibly busy. I can't see how this job will ever be the sort of one where you can just be, lying back in a hammock, sort of counting numbers. It sounds like it's going to be a process where it never really quite ends.
No, but I tell you what, Mark, if you build teams around you and you put people in positions where, you're great people, most of the work is being done within those business units. And so my role is very much one where you're trying to pick the next thing that we go and do, and you're a year or two almost ahead of where the business is. I think that's where you try to get to. So does that mean I'm not going to be lying in a hammock quite so much? For sure. But I'm not a lying in a hammock kind of person.
Presumably, you already knew that when they gave you this new job, Sam.
Absolutely. I think British Airways is doing pretty well out of me at the moment, going back and forth across the Atlantic.
Well, then hopefully the family can do well out of all the air miles you're accumulating. So
quite
good.
Right.
Excellent. So this is going to be a process that's never going to end. So the podcast never ends, by the way. So I'm going to have to get you back on again in 18 months' time or something like that, because I think a lot will have changed.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. And we can talk about how that change has been impacted across the organisation. I'll learn a lot, I think, between now and that period. But thanks so much for coming in to see me today. It's always great to chat. Enjoyed it.
No, thank you so much, Simon.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this programme. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry.
The Voice of Insurance is produced in association with Advantage Go. Release your underwriters to underwrite with Advantage Go's underwriting platform. Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan.
Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.